Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Education is something we all have experience with, and I'm excited to dive into this book with you today.
Me too.
It's called The Learning Game, and it's by Anna Lorena Fabrica.
Yeah,
And I think it's going to give us all a lot to think about when it comes to how we approach learning, both for ourselves and our kids.
yeah, for sure. I think this one is going to resonate with a lot of our listeners.
So you know how we always hear about the game of school?
Right.
Well, Fabrica's book really kind of challenges that whole notion.
It does.
And she makes the argument that maybe we've been playing the wrong game all along.
Yeah, I mean, it really does kind of turn the whole traditional model on its head.
So for our listener, what exactly do we mean by the wrong game?
She's basically saying that the traditional system, with its emphasis on grades and tests, and pleasing teachers,
Right.
that it can sometimes miss the mark when it comes to genuine learning. It's like instead of fostering a love of exploration and discovery, we're kind of just teaching kids to jump through hoops
Right.
and memorize facts without really, understanding the why behind them.
So it's almost like we're teaching them to be rule followers instead of critical thinkers.
Exactly. Yeah. And, she argues that this can have some pretty significant consequences down the line.
Yeah.
She actually outlines what she calls 7 dangerous lessons that the school system can sometimes reinforce.
Oh, wow.
And one that really struck me was this idea that school can inadvertently teach kids to value their class position more than their individual talents.
Oh, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
So instead of encouraging kids to explore their unique gifts and passions,
Huh.
we're almost subtly teaching them to conform to societal expectations.
It can be a bit like that.
Yeah.
And that can really stifle creativity, and prevent kids from reaching their full potential.
Right. I mean, imagine a world where, like, Einstein was more worried about fitting in than about exploring his groundbreaking ideas about space and time.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
Yeah.
So if traditional schooling isn't always the answer, then what does Fabrica propose as an alternative?
Well,
What does she offer us?
yeah, no, she talks a lot about the power of stories and experiences.
She does, yeah.
And I think that's such a compelling argument. She believes that we learn best not by passively absorbing information,
Right.
but by actively engaging with the world around us.
Yeah.
And stories play a huge role in that process. I mean, think about it. We've been telling stories for millennia.
Right.
It's how we make sense of the world. It's how we connect with others. It's how we pass down knowledge.
It's true. Some of the things I remember most vividly are the stories I've heard or read,
Yeah,
not necessarily, dry facts that I've tried to cram into my brain.
absolutely. And stories have this way of capturing our imagination and making information stick.
Right.
And she gives this fantastic example in the book
Oh, yeah.
about an 11-year-old boy who was fascinated by different careers.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. What did he do? He created a podcast about it.
He decided to create a podcast where he interviewed people from all walks of life, doctors, artists, entrepreneurs, you name it.
Wow.
And through that process, he learned so much more than he ever could have from just, reading about those careers in a book.
Of course.
It was hands-on, it was driven by his own passion, and it allowed him to connect with real people and hear their stories firsthand.
That's a great example of how learning can happen outside the traditional classroom setting.
Absolutely.
It's really about, finding those sparks of curiosity and
Yep.
allowing them to ignite into something truly meaningful.
Yeah, I love that.
And that kind of makes me think about this whole idea of vuja de that she talks about,
Yes.
which is like looking at the world with fresh eyes.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Rediscovering that childlike sense of wonder, and seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. And I think we can all benefit from that,
I love that.
no matter our age or background.
Yeah, so it's not just about kids learning new things. It's about all of us, parents, educators, lifelong learners, embracing that spirit of curiosity,
Yeah.
approaching the world with a sense of openness and wonder.
Totally. And I think that's where her insights can be so transformative,
Yeah.
It's not about throwing out the entire education system, but it's about challenging our assumptions, questioning the status quo.
Right.
And finding ways to make learning more engaging, more meaningful, and more aligned with the way our brains are naturally wired to learn.
I'm already feeling inspired, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, me too.
But before we go any further, I want to pause for a moment and ask our listener this question. What about you? What's a story that had a profound impact on your learning one that really made something click for you? We'll be back in a moment to explore more of Fabrica's ideas, including her fascinating take on how games can actually teach us valuable skills.
Oh, yeah.
So stay tuned.
Welcome back. And one of the things I was so excited to dig into with this book is this idea that games can actually teach us valuable skills.
Mhm.
Now, when I say games, I'm not just talking about video games, although those certainly have their place.
Okay.
Fabric is talking about a much broader concept here.
So help me and our listener understand that.
Okay, so she's really fascinated by this idea of flow state.
Yeah.
Have you ever been so engrossed in an activity that you completely lose track of time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It happens to me when I'm writing sometimes. Like I'll look up and hours have gone by.
Right.
And it's like I've entered another dimension.
Exactly. That's exactly what flow state feels like. And it turns out that games are incredibly effective at creating this state.
Right.
Why? Because they tap into some very fundamental elements of human psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So she breaks down flow state into three key components.
Okay.
You have clear goals, unambiguous feedback, and a challenge that's perfectly calibrated to your skill level.
Okay, so it's not just about mindless entertainment.
Right.
There's actually a structure and a purpose to these games that can foster deeper engagement and learning.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because she argues that we can actually apply these principles of game design to create more engaging and effective learning experiences in other areas of life.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
So give our listener an example of how we might apply those game design principles to learning.
Okay. So let's take the example of learning a new language.
Okay.
Instead of just, memorizing vocabulary lists and grammar rules, what if we created a language learning game that incorporated those elements of flow state?
Okay.
Imagine a game where you have clear goals for each level, like being able to order a meal at a restaurant or having a basic conversation with a native speaker.
Right.
And instead of getting a failing grade if you make a mistake, you receive immediate feedback that helps you learn and improve.
That's a really cool idea.
Right.
It turns the whole learning process into an adventure.
Totally.
Like you're leveling up your language skills as you go.
Exactly. And that sense of progress and accomplishment can be incredibly motivating.
Right.
But there's a catch, of course. Oh, what's the catch?
She warns against what she calls pointsification.
Pointsification. That sounds kind of ominous.
It is a little bit, yeah. It's this tendency to focus so much on points, grades, and rewards
Okay.
that we lose sight of the intrinsic value of learning itself.
I see.
Think about the classic video game Super Mario Bros.
Oh, I loved that game as a kid. Still do, actually.
Right. Now think about how the game is designed.
Right.
When you make a mistake, you don't get punished or penalized.
Right.
You just try again. You learn from your failures, and you keep going until you succeed.
Mm.
It's all about mastering the skills and enjoying the journey.
That's so true. I never thought about it that way, but it is such a different approach from the traditional education system where mistakes are often seen as failures.
Exactly. And she argues that this fear of failure can actually hold us back from taking risks and exploring new possibilities.
That's interesting.
What if we applied the Super Mario effect to education?
What if we encouraged kids to see mistakes as opportunities for learning and growth, rather than something to be ashamed of?
It shifts the whole focus from performance to progress,
Yes.
from proving yourself to improving yourself.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really crucial point, which is this importance of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
She believes that the most powerful motivators come from within.
Yeah.
And she identifies three core drivers that are at play in gaming.
Okay. Break those down for me and our listener.
Okay, so you have autonomy, competency, and relatedness.
Okay, so autonomy first.
Yeah, so autonomy is that feeling of being in control of your own choices and actions.
Got it. Yeah.
Competency is the satisfaction of mastering a skill and seeing yourself improve.
Okay.
And relatedness is that sense of connection and belonging that comes from interacting with others.
So it's not about external rewards or punishment.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where kids feel empowered to learn,
Yeah.
where they can see their progress and feel a sense of connection to the learning process itself.
Exactly. And when those three elements are present, the learning becomes almost effortless.
Mm,
It's not a chore, it's an adventure.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, but I have to admit, I'm a parent,
Sure.
and I can't help but think about the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
What about screen time?
Yeah.
I know Fabrica touches on this in the book.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile all of these amazing benefits of gaming with the very real concerns that parents have about excessive screen time?
It's a valid concern, and it's one that she addresses directly in the book. She acknowledges, both the benefits and the drawbacks of technology.
Right.
But she makes a really important point. She says that instead of demonizing screens, we need to understand why kids might be drawn to them in the first place.
Okay, so our listeners probably thinking, Why are my kids glued to these screens?
Right.
Is it just mindless entertainment?
Right.
Are they addicted? What does she have to say about that?
Well, if we go back to those three core drivers, autonomy, competency, and relatedness, it starts to make sense. Kids might be seeking out online environments where they feel a sense of control, mastery, and connection that they might not be getting in their offline lives.
That's a really insightful point.
Yeah.
So it's not just about setting arbitrary screen time limits.
Right.
It's about having conversations with our kids about their online experiences,
Yeah.
understanding what they're getting out of them, and finding ways to foster those same needs in the real world as well.
Exactly. And that's where she offers some really practical advice for parents.
Okay.
She suggests things like collaborative boundary setting, encouraging real-world activities that build competency and relatedness, and really understanding the reasons behind a child's device usage.
So it's about finding a balance, not a ban.
Exactly.
It's a much more nuanced and empathetic approach than just saying, no screens.
Right.
And it recognizes that technology is here to stay, so we need to find ways to use it wisely and intentionally.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. And speaking of intentionality, that brings us to another key theme in the book, which is this idea of skin in the game.
It's skin in the game. I like that. What does that mean?
So this concept really resonated with me because I think it really gets at the heart of what it means to be truly invested in our learning and our choices. It's about having real-world accountability for our actions.
Oh,
It's about understanding that our choices have consequences,
right.
and those consequences can teach us valuable lessons.
So it's like the difference between reading about how to ride a bike
Right.
and actually getting on a bike and trying to ride it.
Exactly.
You learn a lot more from the experience itself, from the bumps and bruises along the way.
Totally. And she argues that healthy competition can actually be a good thing in this context. It's not about winning at all costs, but it's about learning how to push ourselves, strategize, and develop resilience.
This makes me think about the role of parents in all of this.
Yeah.
It sounds like she's advocating for more than just, helping with homework.
Absolutely. She really emphasizes the importance of active parental involvement in education.
Okay.
It's about being present, engaging in meaningful conversations, and fostering a love of learning that extends beyond the classroom.
So it's not about becoming a homeschooling expert,
Right.
but it's about creating that learning environment at home
Yeah.
where curiosity is encouraged and exploration is celebrated.
Exactly. And, this might involve challenging some of our deeply ingrained beliefs about parenting.
Okay, how so?
She actually questions this idea of shielding children from failure, pain, and discomfort.
Wait, so we shouldn't try to protect our kids from experiencing hard things?
Well, not necessarily. Of course, we don't want our children to suffer needlessly.
Right.
But she makes this really compelling argument that allowing them to experience moderate challenges without excessive intervention can actually make them stronger.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right. There's some wisdom in that.
Yeah.
She believes that when kids face obstacles and figure out how to overcome them, they build resilience and develop a sense of self-efficacy.
So it's about letting them fall down sometimes.
Right.
Knowing they have the strength to get back up.
Exactly. And that's where Stoicism comes in.
Okay.
She sees this ancient philosophy as a valuable tool for navigating the ups and downs of life.
I've heard of Stoicism, but I've always been a little bit intimidated by it.
Uh-huh.
I guess I have this image of Stoics as being like emotionless robots or something.
That's a really common misconception.
Okay.
Stoicism isn't about suppressing our emotions. It's about understanding them, managing them, and choosing how we respond to challenges.
Okay.
It's about focusing on what we can control and accepting what we can't.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But how do we teach such a complex concept to kids?
Right. Well, she offers some really practical suggestions, like sharing stories of Stoic heroes,
Okay.
helping kids understand the difference between what they can and can't control, and encouraging practices like journaling and self-reflection.
So it's about equipping them with those mental tools to face challenges with a calm and rational mindset.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties back into, this whole idea of raising successful kids.
Right.
Success isn't just about, external achievements. It's also about developing inner strength and the ability to navigate life's inevitable setbacks.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another important theme that she explores, which is finding that balance between generalism and specialization.
Oh, that's a good one. It's a question that I think a lot of parents grapple with.
Yeah.
Should we encourage our kids to be well-rounded or to focus on developing a specific skill set?
Right.
It feels like there's so much pressure these days for kids to specialize early on. to
Yeah,
become like the next coding prodigy or star athlete.
totally. And she acknowledges that pressure, but she advocates for a more balanced approach.
Okay.
She believes that early exposure to a wide range of experiences is crucial for discovering passions and talents.
So it's about letting kids explore different fields,
Yeah,
try new things,
you're right.
figure out what truly resonates with them.
Exactly. And then once they've found their passion, they can start to delve deeper and develop those specialized skills.
This makes me think about the importance of allowing kids to fail and even quit sometimes.
Hmm.
Like we're so afraid of them making the wrong choice that we end up limiting their opportunities to explore.
Yeah, she makes a really powerful point about the importance of failure in the learning process.
Yeah.
She even quotes Naval Ravikant, who said, "The most successful people are the ones who failed the most."
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement,
It is.
but it makes sense.
Hmm.
Failure is inevitable, and it's often through our mistakes that we learn the most valuable lessons.
Absolutely. And she encourages parents to view failure not as a setback, but as an opportunity for growth.
Hmm.
It's about helping kids understand that it's okay to make mistakes as long as they learn from them and keep trying.
And sometimes quitting can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, in the right context.
Okay.
She argues that allowing kids to quit activities that aren't a good fit frees up their time and energy to pursue things that they're truly passionate about.
So it's about teaching them discernment,
Yeah.
helping them understand when to persevere and when to move on.
Exactly. And this brings us to kind of the final part of the book where she talks about the model parent in today's complex world.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does it take to be a model parent in today's world?
So she suggests that effective parenting requires drawing wisdom from multiple disciplines.
Hmm.
It's not about following a single rigid formula, but about being adaptable, open-minded, and willing to learn from a variety of sources.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Parenting is such a multifaceted role.
Right.
It requires a whole toolbox of skills and knowledge.
It does, and she uses this analogy of a powerful car.
Okay.
She says that raw intelligence is like having a powerful engine,
Right.
but it's the driver's skills that determine how effectively that power is used.
So it's not just about being smart, but it's about having the right mental tools to navigate the challenges of parenting.
Exactly. And she introduces this really fascinating concept of elastic thinking,
Right.
which is all about making connections, thinking outside the box, and approaching problems from multiple angles.
This sounds like a valuable skill for both kids and parents.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And she encourages parents to foster elastic thinking in their children through unstructured play,
Okay.
self-directed projects, and exploration beyond the confines of traditional classroom lessons.
It's about nurturing that innate creativity and problem-solving ability that I think all kids possess.
Yeah, I agree with that. And speaking of elastic thinking, I think we've stretched our brains enough for one segment.
Well, yeah.
We'll be back after a short break to dive deeper into this idea and explore how we can apply these insights to create a more fulfilling and empowering learning experience for our children.
Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered so much ground already in this deep dive.
We have.
But there's still one key idea that I really want to explore further.
Yeah.
And that's this concept of elastic thinking. I love that phrase.
Me too.
It really conjures up this image of, a mind that can stretch and bend and adapt to new information and make connections in unexpected ways.
Yeah, it's a really powerful metaphor.
Mhm.
And, it gets at the heart of what Fabrica is advocating for,
Right.
which is this more flexible, adaptable approach to learning that moves beyond rigid thinking patterns
Mhm.
and really embraces the messiness of creativity.
So for those of you just joining us, can you give us a quick recap of what exactly elastic thinking is
Sure.
and why it's so important?
Okay, so think of it this way. We all have different ways of thinking, right?
Right.
Analytical thinking is like a laser beam.
Okay.
It's focused, precise, great for solving logical problems.
Got it.
Automatic thinking is more like a reflex.
Okay.
It's fast, it's efficient, it helps us navigate everyday routines. But elastic thinking, this is where the real magic happens. It's about making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas, thinking outside the box, approaching problems from multiple angles.
Yeah, I'm starting to get the picture. But how do we actually cultivate this elastic thinking in ourselves and our kids?
Right.
It sounds great in theory,
Mm-hmm.
but are there specific things we can do to actually make our minds more elastic?
Yeah, absolutely. And she suggests several strategies. And I think one of the most powerful is unstructured play. When kids are free to explore, experiment, use their imaginations without a set agenda, their brains naturally start forming those new connections and building those elastic thinking muscles.
This makes me think about how overscheduled so many kids are these days.
Right.
Between school, extracurricular activities, homework, there's often very little time left for just free play.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, as a parent, I sometimes fall into that trap of thinking that every activity has to be educational or productive.
Right.
But maybe I need to rethink that.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents can relate to that.
Yeah.
We want our kids to succeed, so we fill their days with structured activities.
Right.
But what we often forget is that unstructured play. This is where true learning and creativity often blossom.
Mhm.
It's where kids can be themselves, take risks, discover their own unique ways of thinking and doing.
So it's not about throwing out all the structured activities.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Making sure there's still plenty of time for kids to just let their imaginations run wild.
Yeah, and this applies to adults too,
Yeah.
We all need to carve out time for ourselves to explore our own interests, try new things,
Right.
and just let our minds wander. Think of it as giving your brain permission to play.
I love that permission to play.
Yeah.
Because play shouldn't stop when we become adults.
No, exactly.
It's essential for keeping our minds sharp, our spirits high, and our creativity flowing.
Totally. And another way to encourage elastic thinking is through self-directed projects.
Okay.
When kids are passionate about something, they're naturally more motivated to learn and explore.
It's like that example she shared about the 11-year-old boy who created a podcast to explore different careers.
Right.
He was so driven by his curiosity that he basically taught himself everything he needed to know about podcasting, interviewing, audio editing, all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration of how self-directed learning can be so powerful.
Right.
It's not about following a prescribed curriculum,
Right.
but about allowing kids to follow their own interests and discover their own learning paths.
And that kind of ties back to, that idea of shifting from the game of school to the game of authentic learning that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's about moving away from those extrinsic motivators like grades and rewards
Right.
and fostering intrinsic motivation, the joy of learning for its own sake.
I think this has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, me too.
But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Okay.
What's one tangible takeaway they can apply to their own lives or the lives of their children?
I think the most important thing is to remember that learning doesn't have to be confined to the classroom. It can happen anywhere, anytime. Encourage curiosity, ask questions, explore different perspectives, and don't be afraid to embrace the messiness of the process.
It's about fostering a lifelong love of learning, not just for our kids, but for ourselves as well.
Yes, the learning game really reminds us that learning is an adventure,
Yeah.
and it's one that we can all embark on together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the learning game, I want to leave you with this final thought. What's one small step you can take today to make learning more playful, more engaging, and more joyful for yourself or someone you love? It could be anything from starting a conversation about something you're curious about, to trying a new hobby, to simply giving yourself permission to daydream. Remember, the possibilities for learning are endless, and it's never too late to rediscover the joy of discovery.
That's beautiful.
Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters.